for this presentation, most things will be assumed a hog operation, but doesn't mean it has to be. That it can be implemented in a cattle operation as well. So keep that in mind. It's not, doesn't have, even though I mentioned hogs most of the time, that it doesn't have to be. It can be applicable to cattle, or we have people who raise turkeys too that use the software. Okay. The better your setup is, the better the program will work for you. That being said, depending on where you're at in your operation, you're not a lost cause if things aren't going as planned right now. There's always cleanup that can be done. We can get you back on track. Centers are the backbone to your smart feeding records. Centers can be specific sites. They can be specific buildings on a site. Think about how you're going to want to be reporting, and then that will determine how you're setting things up. Location and groups allow more in-depth reporting. So if you use locations, that's one step of more detail, but within a location, if you actually have groups, then it's probably beneficial to go ahead and add those group indicators and track them at that group level. So I think most of you know if you track by group or location, but you know there is that option how detailed you want to go with your data entry. Your ration setup flows to smart feeder planning and rated gain projections. I know there was 2 different companies that are looking at ways to predict their sale weights and when animals will be ready for sale. And the rated gain is essential. The rated gain table setup is essential for that, and then that builds into our smart feeder planning, which does that calculation for you and tells you what weight your animals are estimated at throughout the growth process, as well as how much feed you should be estimating to be feeding those animals at each stage of the growth process. So here's kind of what to expect on setup, and if you have your computers in front of you, or if you just kind of want, if you might be familiar with these screens already. But we'll start with the center setup. These are really small to read. I'm going to see if I can go ahead and make them bigger. Let everything adjust here again, and we'll go to setup. Okay. So you have the first thing you have on setup is obviously active or inactive. You want them active if you want to report to them, and then your numbering. If you're going to want to report on ranges of centers, make sure they're numbered accordingly so that you have them all in order. So I've seen where if you have multiple stages on your operation, that your breeding barns or breeding centers are in your 2000s, your nurseries are in the 3000s, your finishers are in the 4000s. Something along those. That could be hundreds, doesn't have to be thousands, but have some order there where it gives you room for growth of adding new centers if you need to, but it also allows you to report on those in a range to make it easier on reporting. Description is what makes sense to you, whatever you want to have in the description. And then you have types here. When you're talking about feeding, you have 2 main types. You have a feeding center, which will not ask you for a specific group, and then you have group feeding, which then asks you for that specific group and goes down to the group level. If for some reason you had this inactive date is only going to work for your crops. You don't need an inactive date for any kind of feeding center. If you're breeding, you would also have an option for a breeding center here, I guess. It comes over here though. If it's a feeding or a feeding center at all, it's going to give you this livestock option up in the top right hand corner. Asked you want to report your values in hundredweight head, pound, or kilogram. Usually it's either hundredweight or head. For a group feeding, if it was like a sow center, it might be a head, or a breeding center, it might be a head by head. You get to pick your stage of growth. finishing, you do have option for steers, heifers, mix, transfers, breeding nurseries up here as well. If it was a breeding center, you'd have a gestation period, number of crates. All of them you have an animal capacity here. User-defined values. We do have a couple of producers that use these. These are if they're tracking gilts. They might put a gilt in there as a user-defined value and track gilts throughout their sow centers. But otherwise, we've kind of got away from these other ways to report that you don't need these user-defined values anymore in your center setup. Okay. Just going to kind of, okay, next is your group setup. Try to keep on track here. I'll go back and forth between that. Okay. You have active groups and inactive groups. Obviously, if you're adding a new group, it's going to be on the active group list. You want to try to keep this active group list cleaned up pretty well, which means that once a group is closed, you get the close date in there. Once they've been closed for a few months, you need to determine that in each operation, you determine how long it'll be. 3 to 6 months, though, move into the inactive group list just to keep your active group list cleaned up. Here are those where you can add or change your groups. You give them a number, meaningful number to you. Do not put any spaces, question marks, hashtag, dashes, any kind of, the only character you can use in a group number is an underscore. Otherwise, it throws the system into a tailspin, and that's because any kind of slash or hyphen or space means something different to the program based on programming language that I don't understand, but you can't do that. Just underscores are the only kind of other alphanumeric and underscores, nothing else. Please. So you put your group number in. It can be, I said, alphanumeric. It can be, I think, 12 characters long. I recommend starting with a number, but you don't have to. I just recommend that because it's easier on the sort, because it does go by alpha, capitalization, or lowercase as well. So if you're trying to type in and quick enter something to a group, be aware that it doesn't matter if it's capitalized or lowercase when you're trying to find that. You start with a number, you don't have quite that issue. Description can be anything. You can use a source. You don't have to use a source. You can set up sources down here if you want to set up a source on the fly. There is options to report by source if that's important to you. Type in their beginning date. You don't put the end date in until they're sold or moved out completely. You do pick the center it belongs to and the location. You can put in group type, it doesn't have to be. You do need to assign a rate of gain table to the group if you're wanting to do any kind of budgeting or planning on the group. You can also put in group traits here. Again, there is options to report on those group traits. You can set the group traits up here by clicking here and adding new ones. Okay. When you are closing, you have the option to turn on fast close, which is really handy. And you can type in the end date. So if all these close today, it automatically types that date in, but I can change the date. But then you can hit tab down here and just click on down. It's going to put the same date as above and here. Do you want to move them? That means move them to inactive. I would say no, but if you want to put it, you could click in there. It's going to change that to a Y to move it to inactive. Okay, you can change your date close here down here if you didn't want it. If it's like 7/31, we put that date in there, 7/31. Oops. That's fast close. I'm not going to close those, so I'm going to hit cancel. Rations. I mentioned rations can be very helpful in your planning. That's again under setup, feeding, and then rations. What's important about this, and this has become very apparent with our new pork dashboard that we have, is that you set the ration, you give it a number, you give it a description, and you have a phase or a ration type, and that ration type is really a phase. So if you have usually You might use different kinds of rations, but for the first week in the nursery, but it might be, so phase 1 nursery could have several different rations that fit that phase, but you want to have them all as type phase 1 nursery. I could add different types here. I have phase 1 and phase 2 now, but you could have, phase 1 nursery, phase 2 nursery, phase 1 finisher, however you break down your feeding phases, you do want to have those as types, and then have that assigned to the ration. And then over here, each ration, you of course pick an ingredient that you already have on your ingredient list, and then you can go by percent, or if you want to go, instead of percent, go by pounds, you click here, and then we go by pounds, again assuming a 1 ton ration. A couple other things here you have on setup is ingredient, death, loss causes, drugs, and medications. They can all be set up on the fly as you're adding new ones, but just so you know what you're going to be asked in here. You do have a number, a description. You do have class. The classes have to be set up previous to coming in here. I'll show you what that looks like though. But that's where. Set up. There are options on the consolidated cost, feeding cost analysis by ration by feed by class. Excuse me. And I'm forgetting where you set that up right now. Just left me where that is, but there is a place to set up your ingredient classes. And that would be like medication, minerals, premixes, stuff like that is what you would usually have in there. You also put in purchase units, any kind of conversion to feeding units. You can put in a budget price, percent. These are all, the only ones that are mandatory are purchase units and conversion. Everything else is optional. Same with drug and medication. It's going to ask you, the drug. The purchase units, the conversion between purchase units, the application units, a budget price, withdrawal periods, inventory. Of course, this is becoming more and more important with all the new regulations to have all these in here correctly. The more correctly you have your drugs and medication, the better we can report for you on those applications. And then the rate of gain table. If you don't know where to get your rate of gain table from, I go to your feed source. They should have a rate of gain table for you for their feed. So you have you're putting your starting weight, how much you expect them to gain in phase 1, how many days is in that period, and then it'll calculate the expected gain per animal for you. So if we start at 14 and we expected 0.2 pounds, and there's 7 days in that period, but expect at 1.4 figures for you. Type in your feed efficiency. It'll tell you pounds of feed in phase 1. It's usually 0.7 pounds. Then you pick your ration that you use for this table. The other part of this, though, other than just the weights and the phases, is your load days over here. And this is set up on a maximum of 6 pulls out of a barn for sales. And so this is days from the very last pull. So if you're going to start pulling 3 weeks from your last pull, that would be 21 days. So you do minus 21. So it's 21 days from your last pull out of the barn. And then you pick how many pigs you think you're going to pull at that time. So if it's going to be 10%, and then the next week it's going to be minus 14 days. And you think you're going to pull 20% then, and then you're at 7 a week out, and you'll pull another 20%. That means you're only going to do 4 pulls, and it's going to be day 0, and you're going to pull the remaining 50% that week. So total is 100. So that's how you figure out what your pulls are going to be, and that also translate into the smart feeder planning again that I just talked about earlier, which will help you predict when your animals are going to sell and what weight they're going to be at when they sell. So if you have all this in at the very beginning, that makes it really easy to transition to those more complex reports for you. Okay. We talked about the rate of gain table. Okay, you have data entry. After you have your setup, of course, you're going to start your data entry, and we have animal purchases, animal movements, death loss, feeding, drugs and medication, and then your adjustments and movements of feed. For animal purchases, there is 2 ways to purchase an animal. You ideally, because we're trying to make this single entry instead of double entry, it's through a check or an AP using a linked expense account. So you have an account set up for animal purchase. You pick that ledger account, you pick the center it's going into, the division, the dollar amount for the animals, and then it populates a little box, pops up, asks you what group it's going into, how many pigs are going in, what their weight was. Then that means it hits accounting for that purchase. You have an expense for purchases, but it also increases your inventory in that location by the number of head you purchased. If for some reason you do not want to hit accounting, you can do a feeding general input. You can do anything under feeding general input. But because it's under the feeding tab, just keep in mind it's not hitting accounting anywhere. It's only affecting smart feeder if you go under feeding tab, and then they have general input. But you can choose to purchase an animal there and pick a date and a center and a group. Head and quantity, it all goes in there, and it will increase your inventory in Smart Feeder. This looks really small. I do apologize. I was trying to show that both types of entries will show up on this detailed inventory report in Smart Feeder because both hit Smart Feeder. But if I was to run a income statement, I would not have any transaction for the one made through Smart Feeder. It would only be the transaction made through my AP entry. Movement usually doesn't hit accounting. Movement is usually internal. So you can do the animal movement through a feeding general input. See if you were moving from a nursery to a finisher, or if you did sideways movements within finishers, so if you pulled off your gilts and they were in one group all together, gilts and barrows, and you pulled your gilts off for a separate group, or you had one that was really struggling in the group and you pulled it back to the second group, you could do that through a movement and move those animals sideways or nursery to finisher. All these movements will be shown on a Smart Feeder report. You can assign it a value, but if you have Eclipse will override that value you give it. It will calculate the value of the animal based on all the expenses and incomes within Smart Feeder that you've already put in, and it will calculate that cost of that animal and move it accordingly out of the old group and into the in group for you. Regardless of what you put in for value on your movement entry, it will just override that. But if you don't have Eclipse, you can definitely put a value on there, estimated value or your calculated value, however you arrive at that value. Without Eclipse, you could put that value in it, and it would then value those animals based on that. Death loss is done through a feeding general input. Again, you have death loss, and you put in a date, the center and group it goes to, and you have your causes in there. People can be very specific on causes or very general. I've seen it both ways. It just depends on what you want to get out of the report. If you want to be able to report on causes and try to find, and look at if you have an increase in certain causes at certain stages, you can definitely track all those causes. You put in a number. If you have the weights in the animals, you can put the individual weight of the animal. Or if you had 5 death loss in the week and they were all ruptures, and you estimate the total 100 pounds, you could put in a total weight of 100 pounds, and it will figure out your average weight per pig for you. However detailed you put in is how detailed you can get out. We don't care. Just be aware of that's obviously how it's going to work. The next input you have is feed. And there's a couple ways to put it in. You have feed by ticket. And then we have the commercial mill and feed mill import. And I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. And that's going to stay up there though, isn't it? I got to close that to show that. Okay. So if you don't have the mill import option, you would do feeding and then feed by ticket. And you basically hand key in your ticket. and you give it a number, and a date. A date. You can pick a ration, a ticket number, total weight of the ticket, total grind mix tons if it's different from the total weight. You assign it a center and a group if you have groups. If it's not a group feeding center, then you won't populate the group. You pick your ingredient, how many pounds it was, and then if you're purchasing it or if it's inventory item. Again, if you choose purchase here, it's not going to create an accounting entry because we're under feeding tab, but it will put it in as a purchased ingredient on your ingredient summary for you. Ideally, you'll purchase them all through accounting and then come and just pull us out of inventory. If you pull out of inventory, it is not going to do a dollar here. So if we had 2,000 pounds, it'd let me put more in. Then you can go down and figure out what else was in this ration. And it'll make you keep adding lines until you come up to that 2,000 pounds. At the bottom here, it tells you how much feed you've not accounted for. 715, so I put that in there. Just get rid of this. Okay, now it'll let you save it. So that would be one way to put in feed. You can also here add ingredients on the fly if you need to add a new ingredient. I didn't like that. Okay. If you have our import commercial mill or feed mill import module, you can come in here to import export data. Feed mill interface creates just a smart feeder entry. Commercial mill will create payable as well as smart feeder entry. And what this is you have a file from your mill. These are the mills we currently support, but we also have an option down here for unmapped. So as long as it comes in Excel, you can get from your mill in Excel, you can convert it to what's called the CSV file, and then we can map it, and you can bring it in. Then what you do is at the mill location, this is a location that shows up on the file from the mill. You tell it what location that is within FBS. Hopefully it indicates enough that you can pick a center and a group if that's necessary. Then you also map the rations. So if this showed up as ration 9020 on the file from the mill, I need to tell what ration that was in FBS. And then you also map the ingredients individually. So it shows up here, this is probably soybean meal, so I'll go over here and I'd find my soybean meal, lime, I'd find lime, lysine, so on and so forth. You'd map what the mill says to what you have in FBS. And you transfer it in, it would create an AP for you, and it'd also create the entry in Smart Feeder for you. Then you can see those feedings a couple different ways. You have a ticket ration report. You can choose by ticket, by date, by ration, whatever you want to here, but I'm just going to do a quick ticket ration here. And we see right here the one I just entered. And then these are different ones that go by ticket number, then date, then ingredients, and you have everything on. This one didn't find a center. I didn't assign it a center when I brought that one in. The other way you can see the ingredients that you bring in is the ingredient summary report. You run it for a single ingredient or a group of ingredients. And you can see every purchase and every feeding of that ingredient. You can drill into those and see those actual entries as well to see how that got in there, and edit if necessary. Okay, the next is the drug and medication. Administering drugs is just on the, well, you could administer drugs. When you purchase the drugs through a linked account, if you knew exactly what group those were going to when you purchased the drugs, you could assign it through the AP or the check. Usually you buy the drugs in bulk, so you would go ahead and purchase the drugs through an AP or a check to an allocated center, and then you go in here to feeding general input into drugs and medication, type in the date, center, if there's a group, pick the drug, The number is how many doses you're giving. You put in the average weight of the animal, what the dosage was. So based on the dosage you have set up for that ingredient and the, if it was, milliliter, cc, whatever it might be, and it's going to calculate the number of purchase units that you need, that you applied to that group. You can give it a ticket number if you do a ticketing system. And it goes on the next line. As long as you don't tab through this next line, you don't have to delete the line. You just hit save, and it's only going to save that top line. And then to see the reporting for that administration of that drug, you have a couple options. You could do a drug medication inventory report. If I pick Thailand, it's going to show everywhere I applied it, how many doses, the quantity. We also have this drug medication usage report, specified date range. You can type of report can be date by drug, drug date, center date drug, so on and so forth. So we'll go by drug, by date, and you can pick a range or a specific one. We'll stick with that Thailand. Then you can see the date here of every dose of that. You track of that. Okay. Now we get into reports, because of course we've already talked about some of the reports, but if you put data in, you want to get data out. So we have the closed group and open group report. Those are canned closed group and open group reports. We have the cost analysis, which requires a template. Death loss by week. Detailed inventory report, drug usage and drug inventory. We talked about that one already. Ingredient summary, we spoke about that one. We have input history. Ticket ration report, we already talked about that. And then we have user-defined reports. So we'll go through these. Is it any better if I make that bigger? I'll try this again. Skip ahead here. The open group, closed group report. Works with Smart Feeder group tracking system. They create a summary of the production and financial statistics. You'll find the group description, the animal source, the number N, which is the total purchased and moved in, the number died, which is the total number recorded dead, the percent death loss based on the numbers died divided by the numbers in the group, times 100, the number out, which is total numbers sold or moved out of the group. Your closed group report will have the average daily gain for the group, which will be determined by dividing the pounds out by the total animal days. A feed conversion, again, on the closed group report is the total feed disappearance divided by the pounds out. Animal cost is the value of head on the animal purchase divided by the number out. And then other expenses will be the sum of all income and expense accounts, excluding your linked accounts, to this center that's been assigned to that center or group. So it will only pick up income and expenses if it's already been assigned to the group level. And down there below is, this is an open group report, and it will show, if you have the rate of gain table in there, it will give you a projected close date. And if you had feedings in there, I'll give you days on feed and weeks on feed. Closed group, open group reports are great starting reports. Usually on the closed group report, especially, you want a little more detail, and I recommend going to a user-defined group report and setting up your own definition for that. The other report that brings in accounting and Smart Feeder together with direct and indirect costs is the cost analysis report. And this report generates industry standards integrated unit-based income statement for a single or range of feeding centers. It computes your cost of production and net income by centers, and this is based on direct revenue and expenses as well as indirect cost assignments from the overhead allocation table. It does require a split table to be set up. We went over this in detail. And data mining, and if you want more help on this, it takes more time to explain how to set this template up than we have today. So I don't want to go too in depth with it, but basically you can do, it takes divisors, meaningful divisors, so you can have it by hundredweight or by head out, or pounds produced. And you can see what your income and expense and net profit are by those divisors. And these are just some examples of some of your source options on the cost analysis. You have the heading line, they can divide up the report by. You have expenses from a Transaction Plus and income from Transaction Plus, but then you have your linked accounts, your animal sales purchases, your sideways and movements, moved in and moved out, inventory, and then your drug and medication treatments and dollars assigned to those. You can also do your consolidating centers, your cumulative totals and user totals, the shadow expense accounts, death loss, stuff like that, which allows you to bring in those, the shadow expense account lets you bring in the allocated expenses. So if you're allocating, you have costs accruing and like overhead that is then allocated out to your group centers. You can have those shadow account lines through Eclipse that show you, you can drill into and see where those expenses came from that have been allocated to your group. And of course you have your feeding lines by ingredient and ration as well. Now these, in the cost analysis, these are dollars only, these are not quantities. If you want some kind of report that quantifies how much of each ingredient you fed a certain group, you're going to go to the user-defined report. User-defined report can do weights and head and dollars, where the cost analysis only does dollars. We already talked about how the cost analysis allows for those meaningful divisors. This is an example of the death loss by week. I really wish there was a way for me to make that bigger for you. But you have your groups going down the left-hand side there. And then you have the weeks they've been on feed going across the top. And so you can see in week 1, it standardizes in week 1 of feeding for all these groups, this is how many pigs they lost. And in week 2, they've lost this many. So you can see at what stage of feeding are you losing your pigs. I can kind of compare and see how it compares, your groups compare to each other. This is an ingredient summary. It works just like the drug medication. I showed you the ingredient summary too, I think, on the ways to look at the feedings. It just shows you how much you've purchased, how much you've fed, being balances. When we're talking about these inputs, like the feed and like the drugs, these need to be checked minimally once a year, hopefully every quarter, where you actually go out and do an actual inventory of what's on farm for your drugs, what's on farm for your ingredients, if you keep any inventory of ingredients, and match these up and get them cleaned up. Otherwise, if you never reconcile your inventories, you have a mess on your hands, and it starts valuing stuff incorrectly. And just if you keep on top of that, it's better. We talked about the ticket ration report and the user-defined report. User-defined report in the Smart Feeder, you have 2 reports that run off of a definition, and it's a user-defined report and by group, and just a user-defined report. And by group is each column on the report is a group, and on the user-defined not by group, it's each column is a period of time in a center or center group combination that you choose. Both of them use the same definition, so you can use the same definition for both reports. The reports are, like I said, very flexible because, like I said, you can use quantities, not just dollars, on these reports. So you can have your pounds of feed, your hundredweight sold, pounds sold, not just the dollars sold or dollars spent on feed. It's similar to the cost analysis, though, because you can report on direct and indirect costs. You cannot look at where those costs came from if they're allocated, but as long as they're allocated to a group some way and got to the group level or to the center level, you can report on them in these 2 reports. And just to kind of show you what I mean on that, I don't know if I have a definition set up here or not, but we'll look. Okay, so we have the user-defined report here. It's above the group reports, and then we have the user-defined report by group down here. They use the same definition, if I have any definitions set up. And we'll see what this one says. I don't have much here. I have number died and total weight. So you can see this is no dollars. This is totally numbers and weights that I'm reporting on here. But I could add in some dollars. You can add, here's just an idea of what you can add on here. You have headings, obviously. You have moved in, moved out, purchases, sales, total in, which would be moved in plus purchases, total out, which is sales plus moved outs, death loss, feeding by ingredient, class, ration, or type, income. This is a transaction plus income accounts, so non-linked accounts. Expenses, again, these are transaction plus expense accounts, not just linked accounts. We have some totals and some inventories, drugs and medications, descriptions. It's endless. And then beyond that, once you're talking about these sources, you have subfields. So you have total weight, total value, weight per head, value per head, by hundredweight, by percent. I don't mean to show you all this to scare you from using this report, because once you get into it and you get used to it, it's pretty easy to set up the lines like you want to see them. But it's just so flexible. I have people using these to compare their price they're getting at the packers or how they're cutting at the packers. Because you can run it by packer. If you have multiple packers, you might have a hog sales account for each of those packers, so you can compare your dollars, you can compare your back fat, you can compare your premiums across your packers if you do that for groups, or even for centers. You have different packers for different centers. You can do a complete closeout here. Any information that you put into Smart Feeder, you can pull out here in some way or another by whatever divisor is meaningful to you: head, pound, hundredweight, percent sold, whatever. It does seem overwhelming, but I promise you'll use a few of these over and over again, and you won't ever look at the other options here. And the help file is excellent on this section. If you come to the user-defined report, hit F1 if you're in there, and it will give you, I recommend if you're working with the user-defined report, I tell you to print out these sections, print out what these sources are and what they're going to give you. So you're not always questioning what you're going to get by what source you pick. And then based on your source, it again gives you here, for your moved in, moved out, here's going to be your subfields you're going to get for that option. So print this out so you can have it handier than going to electronic file. You can highlight, make your notes on it, whatever you want. But if you're going to be working with these definitions, print this out. You'll be time ahead to go through and know these and have these easier to find. And of course, you can always call support, and we'll help you with your definition. We'll review your definition for you. If you want me to write a definition for you, I can. It goes with the regular training cost. I think mine's $45 an hour to write the report. And if you can give me a printout of a closeout report you want, if I have an example in front of me, it won't take me an hour to get the report written for you and defined for you. As long as you don't say, well, I think I want this, and if you're specific on what you want, I can get it done pretty quickly. Just have good examples for me. That can be a really powerful report. And 9 times out of 10, this is the kind of closeout people use instead of the closed group report. Most people are at the level that they use this user-defined report. I think that's it. I think. Just be aware there is a Smart Feeder planning budget. I don't have it in here, but what it does, like I said, it goes off the rate of gain tables. It will estimate your weights and your sale dates and your feed usage. There's also reports if you have all your feed in right and your budgets in right. Your rate gain tables in right and your rations in right. Then you have the feed budget by group report that shows you how close you are to your feed budget. Input history report, if you need to dump anything out of FBS, if you've put it in here, you can dump it out using date ranges and record types. Here's all the different record types you can pull out. So if I wanted to just see death loss records, So the date range selected, it would give me this report, export it into Excel if you need to import it anywhere else. Or for graphing purposes in Excel, you can pull any of your data you put in out through this input history report. Absolutely everything is here. As a quick overview of the smart feeder system, is there anything anybody wants to see more in depth or has questions on? Okay.
Is there a place in the user-defined reports making it goes out to generate average cost of ingredients per ton? Or is that just something? Is that something that you with your calculator?
Yeah, you would have to do that. That's what you could do. Calculate by there's calculate lines in there. So if you had, you could have your total feed cost, and you had your total pounds fed. So from total pounds fed, you could get total tons fed by calculating that. So you probably could eventually get down to that, but it'd be a couple lines. And you can put those lines on that report, and you don't have to see all those calculate lines. You can hide them. So they'd be in the background for you, but you probably could, but there's not a specific line that would do that, but you could get there. Yeah.
Can you export your ration schedule to co-ops and feed mills and stuff like that so that they can kind of set up? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Here, you mean the rations themselves?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can export this out. It lists the ration and all the ingredients and stuff. You can either print it as a PDF or you can export it in Excel.
Okay.
And send it wherever you need to. Some things I didn't hit on that I guess I should have as well, other than I said we have import option for the feed mill. We do have packer as well, in case you weren't aware. You could also do some importing, like death loss imports if you track it. And I always forget, I'm missing a file on my TA import. I can't show that. You could import like death loss through an Excel sheet. If you track it on an Excel sheet somewhere, you could transfer that in as well. You just have to have listed on there what group, what center, dates, causes, head, and pounds. And you could import that in through the Transaction Plus import-export routine. And then you also drug and medication applications. You could, if you had a spreadsheet, you kept that on somewhere. There were some people that they aren't here this year. We have had clients that use like Google Forms so everybody in the barn has like a tablet that has a form on it. If they have internet, they fill out the form. It goes to an Excel sheet in the office, and then they import from the Excel sheet into FBS for the drug usage and the death loss from the barns. So, but any app, if you have your own apps that do that on your tablets or phones in the farm, as long as it exports into Excel or CSV at some point in time, you could import that in to the Transaction Plus import routine. Any more questions?